What happens after death? The police arrive at the place of the man's death. Law enforcement officers describe the body, preliminarily determine whether a person was killed or he died himself, and then cause corpse transportation. The naturalness of death raises questions not only in cases when a person has a knife sticking out of his chest. The sudden death of a person who has not been seen by doctors for a long time and has not complained about his health is often considered suspicious. There are now two types of morgues in Russia: forensic and pathologic anatomical. In the first, most of the corpses are sent, in the second only those that are going to be examined from a scientific point of view. I worked in the first type of morgue. They decide whether the death was violent, and the pathologist must confirm or deny the diagnosis made by the medical examiner. Police officers do not always thoroughly investigate the scene of an accident. It happens that a body is brought in with a diagnosis of cardiovascular insufficiency, and then in the morgue, they find a huge wound on the back of the head from a heavy object. I had such a case in my practice. My grandmother was brought. I wrote sudden death, for which I then received a hat. There was a wound in the woman's hair that I did not notice. It turned out that she was killed by hitting her head with a wrench. What does a morgue attendant do? At one of the first courses of medical university, I got a job as a night nurse at the morgue. This is the most common practice for students. Many choose such a job. It is night, so it does not interfere with their studies, does not require much effort and brings some income. Despite the specifics of the profession, it did not cause any of the surrounding questions. On the contrary, when I found myself in unfamiliar companies, I immediately became the center of attention. I have a carload of interesting stories from comical to tragic. The essence of my job was to accept corpses and issue documents for them. I also had to hang tags on the dead. First and last names are written on them. Contrary to stereotypes, they are hung not on the big toes, from there they easily fly off, but on the ankles or hands. Then the corpse had to be put in the refrigerator. Rotten bodies are stored in a separate room. The refrigerator will not save them. I didn't open the corpses, but I often observed this process. Sometimes I had to do it for my studies. The most difficult thing for me was getting used to the work schedule. Sometimes it happened that I didn't sleep for several nights and then fell asleep at the wheel or at school. There are about 12-13 morgues operating in all of Moscow. They differ not only by districts, but also by specifics. A few years ago, we opened a forensic medical examination bureau where most of the corpses are sent. If 10-15 dead people are brought to a regular morgue overnight, then there are about 40. There are specialized morgues for rotten corpses, foreigners, children, for gunshot and explosive wounds. There is a legend according to which in the 90s the bandits turned to the chief medical examiner of Moscow to open a special morgue for firearms. They say, "We are tired of looking for our boys all over the city." Quote, "The task of the orderly is also to accept only those corpses that relate only to your morgue. Messing up with the documents is the worst thing. Often this can turn into a trial. The salary of the night nurse is small, 20,000. But, in fact, you do your own thing. You sleep, watch TV, read books, study lessons and take corpses every few hours. Since students work most often, parties in morgues are a common thing. I myself often invited friends to drink beer, watch football, and gave them excursions. No one will swear if you don't mess up. The main thing is to arrange the corpse correctly. About visitors. I've never been scared. Working in the morgue helped to understand that it is necessary to be afraid of the living, not the dead. For example, crowds of Caucasians often came at night and demanded to take the body of one of their own. They are armed. You don't know how to explain to them that you have no right to give a corpse without documents. It happened that at such moments I myself was preparing for death. Normal people are sometimes allowed to look at a corpse unofficially, but this can turn into big problems. Letting people inside the morgue is dangerous. You never know how a person will react. Someone gets hysterical, someone faints. Often people do not recognize their relatives because the muscles relax after death and the face looks completely different. Plus, corpses often look very bad, especially after a violent death. The intestines are out, the eyes have fallen out, the brain has leaked out. For the first time I myself felt bad from this. There is only one way to deal with this: to look at it more often. To get a corpse in the morgue, you need to go through a complicated bureaucratic procedure. People often come from villages and want to pick up one of their relatives without documents. I have to explain to them that you have no right to give the body without documents, and they swear and threaten in response. I always tried to have a diplomatic conversation, but several times I had to call the police. We had an agreement with the local police department so that they would leave on the first call. One day a husband and wife came to the morgue. The woman tried to pay us a lot of money to roll her out in front of her husband on a gurney, as if she were dead. She had a fake death certificate and a makeup artist with her. It looks like she was planning to fake her own death, but we laughed and sent her to hell. Funeral agents and makeup artists. Funeral homes have connections with everyone. This is really a huge mafia. Some agents are connected with the police, others with doctors, and others with corpse transportation. There are people everywhere, and the task of the agents is to arrive faster than the others. Funeral prices are taken from the ceiling. Agents are subtle psychologists. They are able to persuade a person to do anything. The same funeral can cost from 10 to 100,000 rubles. It is clear that a person whose loved one has died will not bargain. He can't say, "No, dear, I won't bury my grandmother." On the other hand, funeral agents are, of course, convenient. The families of the deceased do not have to run all over Moscow and look for a bureau, negotiate with a cemetery, organize a funeral, draw up a bunch of documents. It's very difficult to do everything without an agent. According to the rules, paramedics should prepare the body for the funeral, but now special makeup artists are doing this. There are different situations. For example, a person does not have a face. Once we received such a corpse after an accident. A makeup artist made a plaster model and painted a face on it. They also sew on severed limbs. Dangers and fears. It's dangerous to work in the morgue because of infections. You never know what you're dealing with. The smallest wound received here heals very badly. It necessarily suppurates, becomes inflamed. There was no smell of formalin in our morgue. The corpses themselves often smell very bad, but you get used to it quickly. In the sections with the dead, it smells of all the physiological fluids at once. Blood, urine, feces. Rotting corpses are a separate story. There are always meat flies in them. They lay eggs in their mouths, ears, and eyes. Worms come out of there later. It is impossible to get rid of them. When you walk along the section with rotten corpses, you can hear a characteristic crunch under your feet. It is impossible to predict how the corpse will decompose. Cancer-depleted grandmothers simply shrink and mummify, and pot-bellied men begin to rot, swell and stink wildly. Not all corpses are taken away at once. The bodies, for which no one comes for a long time, are sent to the corpse storage, where they lie until the end of time. When the place ends there, the corpses are cremated. It's much scarier for those who work on corpse transportation. Sometimes they have to come to such houses, which is scary. Huge cockroaches, beetles, dozens of cats that eat the body. By the way, about pets, not myths at all. If the corpse lies for 3 or 4 days, then the beloved dog or cat is in a hurry to gnaw the dead owner. First of all, they eat the eyes, tongue and stomach, the most delicious. Unusual dead. There is always a story behind any dead person. In particularly interesting cases, we found out from the police what happened there, but more often it passes us by. The corpses of children are scary. You have no idea how many children die at the hands of their parents. Once we received a child on whom the TV fell. Often the bodies of children were brought all in bumps and abrasions. Once they brought a rotten corpse from a forest belt. It is not known how long he lay in the forest, but there were so many worms and flies inside him that the gurney moved under the corpse. I've never seen anything like it again. During the holidays, especially in the New Year, there are a lot of murders and suicides. Once, for example, a father killed his daughter and shot himself. Someone throws himself out of the windows. Once a guy was running away from the police on the roofs, fell off and fell. He had 2 bags of Barbie dolls with him. What he did with them is unknown. Once they brought a Caucasian woman who got hit by a train. She looked decent. I started examining the body and she had some briquettes fixed on her chest. I was scared. I think either explosives or drugs, there will be no problems. It turned out that she worked at some dairy plant and she had cottage cheese hidden in these briquettes, which she stole. Somehow they found a rotten hanged man in handcuffs, dressed in women's clothes. What happened to him has remained a mystery. There was another interesting situation. A man built a sawn-off shotgun to shoot himself, wrote a suicide note. Apparently, he decided not to dirty the apartment and went to the bathroom. He had a heart attack on the threshold, and he died. A lot of dismemberment was brought to us. Do you remember the story when one psycho killed his drinking buddy, dismembered him, and ate his liver? Almost every day the police brought us new body parts. They couldn't find the head for a long time. You can't identify the corpse without it. The wrong one was brought a couple of times.